Now it's my great pleasure to welcome our keynote speaker, Dr. Pandor. Dr. Pandor, welcome. And can I first say that I address you as a fan? So excuse my exuberance at the opportunity to meet you and say hello to you. For several months last year, I turned on the TV to watch you every time. You spoke at the UN about the conflict in Gaza, and your eloquent and passionate sort of appeal for circumstances to change. So those of you who do not know Dr. Pandor, I will not go through her distinguished career and achievements, apart to say that until a few months ago, she was the foreign minister of the South African government. Dr. Pandor, welcome. The floor is yours, and we're all waiting to hear your remarks on this very complex but vitally important issue. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Dr. Nair. I'm just in receipt of a message, which is rather frightening, about Gaza, which indicates that the UN Office for Humanitarian Affairs has reported that all bakeries in Gaza are closed as no fuel is being allowed in to run them, and there's virtually no flour to make bread. Secondly, a minimum of 608 trucks a day is what is needed to sustain life in Gaza, but only 487 trucks have been allowed in the past 3 weeks. So these are the frightening circumstances that the people of Gaza and Palestine are living in day to day. Nonetheless, let me come to the discussion of today. And I begin by greeting all participants from an unusually cold and snowy South Africa. I believe that this webinar on the uncounted cost of conflict and its contribution to climate change impacts of natural disasters, harmful emissions, food insecurity, and tons of harmful debris is a timely and very relevant conference today. We have a great deal said by policymakers on the subject of climate change, but their focus tends to be more financing or greater investment in innovation and research, and sometimes deliberations about technology transfer. It is very rare to hear any of them acknowledge the harm that conflict and war cause to the agenda of creating a resilient, sustainable environment. Today, world leaders, particularly those of the richest North, are basically preparing for increased arms production, more investment in the defense sector, and the development of a more sophisticated ability to kill and destroy. All this in the face of a vastly increased inequality, severe poverty and malnutrition, and a worrying reduction in international aid for developing countries. There is no leadership in our globe for peace, despite growing evidence of the destructive impact of conflict. Climate conference resolutions focus on waste management, plastics waste reduction, and other climate effect management strategies, but none of them give attention to managing the waste of damaged infrastructure, of increased emissions from armaments, and of increased human insecurity, a subject we rarely discuss. A recent meeting of the African Union Peace and Security Council reflected on this link between conflict and climate change. They asserted that investigations by the AU reveal a strong link between climate change and conflict. They referred to environmental pressure over scarce resources, which has increased by irregular community displacement, as well as the failure of public policy and public institutional capacity to address the need to respond to these crises. All of these inadequacies fuel increased climate effects. There's a wide body of research on this subject, and increased attention must be given to the nexus between conflict arms proliferation, infrastructure collapse, and climate change effects. The UN, our world's premier multilateral body, needs to play an expanded role in promoting peace and conflict prevention and the reduction in lethal weapons in the globe. I don't think we can discuss this subject without talking about demilitarization or reducing the proliferation of arms throughout the world. We need to have initiatives directed at supporting community economic development and the building of stable democracies which respond to the needs of the most marginalized and vulnerable. We need to create conditions in which peace can support stability and focused responses to climate change. I think if you have a situation of conflict, you cannot pay attention to all that needs to be done to respond to climate change effects or to reduce their harm. I believe I should conclude by stressing that conflict harms the progress we have made in gender equality, as women are vastly affected by war and the harmful impacts of climate change. This is particularly true for the large populations of rural women in many parts of Africa. Their dire circumstances are made worse by the impact of conflict and by the degradation of climate change effects. We need a dedicated, effective peace movement linked to environmental sustainability. I think it would add value to all our deliberations on the subject of climate change, but most significantly, I believe such a peace movement would benefit the poor and most vulnerable greatly. And that should really be the world's condition, changing the condition of the most marginalized, of the poorest, so that we can together attend to the difficult subject of addressing climate change. I wish you well in your deliberations, and I hope all of us will join a global movement for peace.